Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
When I started in politics, trade unions were a power in the land. Their leaders were household names, much better known than almost all MPs. The moderate ones got a knighthood. Sir Tom Jackson of the handlebar moustache, for example. And even left-wing giants like Hugh Scanlon frequently ended up in the House of Lords.
Union power was busted by Margaret Thatcher, of course, with a little help from her friends, who could perhaps have stopped her, but didn't have the courage. And so a long, dark night of depressed workers' rights was to follow.
Unions had power in the Labour Party too, and could still have had it if they hadn't given it away to the blandishments of Tony Blair.
The Blairites thought taking power from the unions would ensure they were in power in Labour in perpetuity. Look how that turned out.
Our first guest personifies today's union leaders, politically savvy, firmly on the left, and running a professional organisation which delivers for its members. It would have to deliver because he's the man who represents your posties. He's Dave Ward, General Secretary of the Union of Communication Workers. Dave, welcome to Sputnik. The Royal Mail is still called the Royal Mail, but Her Majesty no longer owns it. How's privatisation working out?
Well, it's not going very well. We've just served notice for industrial action. We'll be balloting over 100,000 postal workers next week for industrial action. Some very big issues that we've got to deal with, some very big differences between us and the company. I think workers at the moment, frontline workers in the post, are under more pressure than I can ever remember to work harder, faster and cheaper. And this is to achieve completely unrealistic efficiency targets, which have nothing whatsoever to do with growing the business or innovating services for customers, and everything to do with making sure that hedge funds and the private shareholders get their dividend. I mean, since Royal Mail was privatised, over 800 million, nearly, I think it is, coming up to that, has gone out of the company, been sucked out of the company, which could have been used for investment in services and gone into the hands of 800 million in 3.5 years.
Unbelievable.
And then if you factor in that it was undersold by Sir Vince Cable, who's the shareholders cashed in a substantial profit within days, didn't they?
We're still paying the price for that now, and the public is still paying the price for that now. We've got some big issues. The company are attacking our members' pensions. I mean, this is the irony of this, is at a time when the company is slashing our members' pension entitlements, refuses to give us a pay award this year, pay rise, it is focused totally on increasing the dividend to its shareholders.
Well, the company was undersold. £800 million has been sucked out of the company in dividends to private owners. And what's the service like to the public?
Well, I think what's happening with the service is it's coming under pressure. If you went to our local offices, this is the pressure that I'm talking about frontline workers are under. It's chaotic in a lot of our local offices now. Every day, I don't think people really know what they're going to do from the start they come in. The net result of that, sort of chaotic management planning, chasing efficiency all the time, is that deliveries just keep getting longer and later. The company would say that's about automation. They would say that, you know, it's about making sure they get a return on the investment of automation. But it seems to us amazing that automation comes in and the mail actually gets there later.
That's worse.
Not earlier. So, you know, we've got some big issues. We want to campaign, we have been campaigning for 4 pillars of security, which we want to share in the benefits of automation. So we want our workers to get shorter working hours, not longer. We obviously want to get a decent pay rise, But we want to change the strategy of the company as well. We want a new deal on pensions for all our members. We're not going to accept their attack on our pension entitlements. But we want to change the direction. It's important that Royal Mail continues to be a company that serves the public of this country. It's also important that it innovates its services, and we believe it's entirely possible, despite the changing world of communications, which we acknowledge, for a company like Royal Mail to continue to be successful. But what it's got to do, it's got to put itself at the heart of local communities, it's got to put itself at the heart of internet transactions, and it's got to defend and expand on the universal service.
Now, what about the McDonald strike? Shocking wages and working conditions?
I think there's never been a time that I can remember in my working life where workers everywhere are under as much pressure as what they are now, where jobs, you know, people used to talk about employment. Now we need to talk about the quality of jobs. And you know, there's no other way of saying it, but there's a lot of jobs around. Yeah. And people can't make a living and start a life with the levels of pay and the conditions. And the McDonald's story is really inspiring. I mean, for all workers, for a company like McDonald's, for the workers there, actually my granddaughter's just started working there. And this is a great moment for the trade union movement, that workers in places like McDonald's are now being organised and they're saying they haven't had enough. I mean, we've got the TUC Congress next week, and our union is putting forward some really strong propositions. I believe personally that such is the nature of the balance of forces against us at the moment in the world of work. If you add into that what's coming down the line with digitalisation, and now that's going to change the world of work, this is the moment for a call to action for workers across the piece. And the way to do that is to set out what we believe is a new deal for workers that all workers in whatever industry, private or public sector, can get behind. Change the contractual status of many employees in this country, fight for higher pay, decent pensions. And this is a moment where I think there's an onus on all unions to look at common bargaining agendas to tackle these companies who push forward insecure employment. It's an opportunity to set out what constitutes a new deal for all workers in Britain. And it's got to be supported by a major campaign. Let's get 1 million workers out on the street by about March next year, campaigning for a new deal. Communicate what that looks like. Get the Labour movement behind it. I think Labour have already made a great start on that.
New Deal is quite a good title for it. By the way, figures out this week show that there has never been a sustained fall in living standards in Britain like this for 150 years. Can you believe that? We're talking about, what, 1870 being the only comparable period of a sustained fall in living standards. Now, you touched on Labour there. Jeremy Corbyn's supporting you in your ballot. He's supporting the McDonald's workers in their strike. It's a long time since we've had a Labour leader supporting industrial action.
It's a great time for the movement to come together and to start to think about being radical and change the world that we live in on all levels. And, you know, Jeremy Corbyn, the team around him, John McDonnell, and all of that team deserve huge credit for being brave enough to put forward a transformative manifesto, for talking about and delivering on building a mass movement. And that's why we supported Jeremy. I think we were one of the first unions out of the traps because we'd had enough of what New Labour stood for. You know, it was quite clear to us for many years that New Labour had walked away from ordinary working people. And Jeremy Corbyn was a catalyst for change in the Labour Party, and that's why we supported him. He's now become a catalyst for change in the country, and I do think that there is a real opportunity. One of the things I would say about the trade union movement, George, is that we spent years as union leaders, and my predecessors and other union leaders' predecessors, telling the Labour Party what it needed to do to get back to representing working people. I think the union movement now has to follow the lead of Corbyn, and we have to set out what we're going to do to get back to representing working people. We need to rejuvenate our movement. We need a call to action. I'm not talking about you put your head down and you run at them. There has to be a deliverable plan that all unions can get behind and work. But I believe this is the moment. Young people recognise that. And I think one of the great things about the general election with Labour's manifesto is that even some of the older people who perhaps had turned away from Labour, I think they were listening again.
Of course, if the Blairites within the Labour Party hadn't spent the best part of 2 years trying to destroy Jeremy Corbyn, we'd probably have a Labour government today. It would be Labour negotiating Brexit. It would be Labour presiding over these employment issues that you speak of. He really has turned out to be a bit of a Superman. And the people like you that loyally stood by him when enormous pressures to distance yourself, to ditch him, were there. You must feel, and you're entitled to feel, absolutely vindicated by a Labour vote that went up by 4.5 million on the last guy.
I think feeling vindicated is part of it, but there's work to do. And I just get this sense that there's a platform that Corbyn has built that we've got to get behind like no other time. And yeah, it was, if you go back to those periods, there were some difficult moments, even with our own members. You know, we have to be honest about that. There was a lot of our members who were probably struggling, listening to some of the media stories, listening to some of the completely outrageous attacks on Corbyn, and the media, you know, carries weight, as we know. But to come out at the end of that with that manifesto, you know, where you talk about taking back control and you start talking about taking back real control of your railways, of your energy, of, you know, putting the NHS back together again, a national education programme. This is a fantastic platform. Council housing being built, new employment rights. And all I'm saying is, you know, we will stick with Jeremy Corbyn and that agenda. But I think it's also time for the trade union movement to now say to itself, well, what are we going to do for workers in this country? How are we going to tackle insecure employment? And we're putting that plan forward at the TUC next week.
Well, the best of luck in your industrial future and at the Labour conference.
Can I just say one final thing? We also represent telecommunication workers and financial services workers, and they are coming under increasing pressure as well on their pensions. So watch this space.
Dave Ward, thanks for joining us on the Sputnik.
Coming up next, staying with Royal Mail, but looking at mental health. Don't miss it.
Welcome back to Sputnik. Anyone who's ever dealt with the public, as I have on a daily basis for decades, is well aware of the increasing prevalence of people with mental health problems.
Of course, these are the obvious cases. Green ink letters, people suffering from paranoia, people who can harm themselves and others.
But millions of people have or will suffer from mental illness in their lives, and they won't be regarded as if they were recovering from any other kind of illness either. The stigma is absolute and forever. Joining us to discuss this growing problem is Dr. Shaun Davis, who heads the Safety, Health and Wellbeing section of Royal Mail. Dr. Shaun, thanks very much for joining us. Sketch, if you will, the scale of mental illness in Britain today.
So we know through the research and through the various charities and organisations that we work with that 1 in 4 will be affected by a mental health condition. So you're quite right when you say that it will touch many others.
So that's 15 million people.
Yeah. Yeah,
wow.
And if you think about how that can affect each, even if you're not directly affected by it, the fact it could be a loved one, a family member, I would argue that each and every one of us is going to be touched at some point, to some degree, by mental health.
Well, statistically, that must be true. If it's 15 million plus their families, that's more or less the whole population of Britain. This, of course, is a range of problems, from depression, not wanting to go out, to being out and being extremely dangerous. Have I got that right? Are these the parameters?
So I think it is what we call multifactorial. So there's various degrees. It is a scale. There's various aspects of it, and it does range, as you quite rightly said, from anxiety and depression through to serious cases that require hospitalisation and long-term treatment. I think you're quite right to point out that it is a scale. And the other thing to remember is that people move up and down that scale depending on particular conditions. So you don't fall into a category. You're not an A-list A-list sufferer of mental health condition, a B-list sufferer. It depends, and lots of different things can affect that. If I think to my own personal experience, I needed some mental health support following a bereavement. My brother-in-law was sadly taken from us really young, and I needed a level of support. And that, again, is part of a scale. Some people need it, some people dip in and out of it, some people are on long-term ongoing treatment.
Now, you handle this for Royal Mail, which must have a huge number of employees. How prevalent is it in the workplace? I mean, people reporting sick for mental health problems.
So 1 in 6 people in the workplace are affected with mental health conditions and mental health issues. And within Royal Mail, we've tended to focus on what we can do at the preventative end. So obviously we have an occupational health programme where we will support our employees should we need to in the event of them being taken unwell. But my strategy and the strategy of the organisation is to be at the more protective and preventative end. So we have a programme that we call Feeling First Class and First Class Support, and that is our employee assistance programme. And we try to create a culture where we will encourage people to talk about their own mental health, how they're feeling, and to act as coaches, support, ambassadors to other people.
So Royal Mail seems like it's, at least in this respect, a good employer, but that will not be true across the board, will it? There'll be lots of places where people work, where signs are not spotted and where support isn't given.
Yeah, and I think Royal Mail, I'm really personally really proud to work for an organisation such as Royal Mail that is committed to the health, wellbeing and mental health of our people. And I know that I speak on behalf of the entire senior leadership team and lots of our people when I say that they're fully committed to mental health. But unfortunately, there are organisations that are not, and that's for various reasons. Some people don't know what to do, so they tend to kind of ignore it and hope these things go away. Other people are still just really early on in terms of discovering themselves what they could do to protect and prevent on mental health. One thing that I personally share with people when they ask me about it is to just do something. Anything that creates a culture where people will talk about mental health or will share their own stories is a positive step. So obviously Royal Mail, large organisation, lots of support, we can do lots of things. We can influence the fabric of the UK as well because of the size of us. But that doesn't mean that the smaller organisations, you don't
have the budget, for example, because I assume you need to allocate some money for it.
Absolutely right. The budgetary piece is an aspect, but how much budget do you need to have a conversation? How much budget do you need to say to somebody, how are you today? Yep. So there's various things that people can do, and I think that what you can do is flex. And my personal view is that it's an aggregated effect. If we all do a little bit of something, it'll move the debate on. If you think about how people didn't talk about cancer years ago, and now people talk about cancer and treatments, we should be trying to do the same thing for mental health.
Well, it starts with the fact that mental health is the Cinderella of the health system, isn't it? It doesn't get the share of budget in the overall health allocation. At least that's what campaigners say. And then there's the issue of stigma. Yeah. I mean, there's no getting away from this. If you applied to me for a job and you'd previously, I don't know, even in an extreme case, had a leg amputated or had suffered from cancer, I would not, I think, and I'm quite an enlightened guy, view that in the same way as if you said to me, I want a job with you, but I've previously been quite seriously mentally ill. How do you deal with that?
It's about educating organisations. So there is a direct link between good work and good quality work and positive mental health. So we would, far from write people off for a mental health condition, we would support them at work. If they went off work sick, we would encourage them back to work, and we certainly wouldn't discriminate against people coming to work and actually. Work is really good for your mental health, really, really good. And actually the relationship piece and working with your colleagues and having a sense of purposefulness can be hugely, hugely positive on the recovery piece.
What else could the government do, you think? You're talking about, the responsibility of the employers. What about the government itself?
So the government, in my dealings with the government, they've been supportive of mental health and mental health agenda. As always, and you quite rightly said, there's financial challenges, budgetary challenges. I think what they could do is create a movement that pulls organisations together so that organisations are sharing best practice. So there was some work done quite recently in the last couple of years where they pulled together best practice from organisations and shared that. I think more work in that area could be really beneficial to help the smaller organisations or those organisations who are just starting out on the journey.
Going back to my previous metaphor or analogy, I don't know which it was. If you came in for your interview with me and you had your leg amputated, it would be kind of obvious.
Yeah.
But mental health isn't as obvious, is it? What signs...
people would not admit it. That's the thing, because of the stigma.
I mean, what signs do you look for, let's say, in your work in the Royal Mail?
So the first thing, you're quite right, it's not obvious, but what you can do is create a culture where people will talk about it. So you try and encourage people. What we need to do is stop people thinking, I can't talk about it, I'll be out on my ear, I'll get the sack, or I won't get that job. Then what we need to do is get people who've had that experience to share their stories. I can think of a number of people within Royal Mail who have come forward and said to me, can I tell you my story publicly across the organisation, people who've had short-term absence, longer-term absence, bipolar, etc. Let me tell you what happened to me, let me tell you what I did, and let me tell you how I got back to work and handled it. So it's fine people like me talking about mental health and what organisations can do, but it's really powerful when colleagues and co-workers talk about it.
Now, Royal Mail is obviously the more enlightened end. Again, I stress on this issue. I'm with the workers on wages and conditions and so on. But, I mean, what's the investment by Royal Mail on health, safety, well-being? How many people have you got, for example, under you?
So within my direct team, we've got 90 people in my team.
90?
Yeah, but across the organisation, we've got a number of area safety representatives, workplace safety representatives. I've got a fantastic relationship with our union, the Communication Workers Union and Unite, and we really pulled together on the Safety Health and Wellbeing agenda, and I feel really lucky to be working with those people. So we've got an extended population then of about 120. So you look, you're north of 200. So, but that's a committed team, but also line managers have got responsibility for safety, health and wellbeing, and we've got a dedicated occupational health function as well that we work alongside. So there is a big commitment to the safety, health and wellbeing of our people.
What could other employers watching this, what could they do? Because I certainly know of many employers who haven't given a moment's thought to this for one reason or another.
So there's a couple of things they could do. I think the first thing is just do something. So lots of organisations, in my experience, want to create a strategy and a plan, and they want to put it through the various approval processes, and they want to launch it with big fanfare. And of course, there's a governance requirement. You've got to do things properly, but there are other things you can do in tandem. Just do a little bit of something. Just try and create a culture where people will have that water cooler conversation. How are you? And actually take time to listen. That's one thing they could do. And the other thing is they can go to, there's so many resources out there that they can look at. There's various charities, there's organisations like Mind, there's other organisations like Business in the Community. There are a variety of charities and trusts out there that will gladly share what they've learned and what they know into organisations and help them develop a strategy. So it'd be two things for me. It would be just do something and kind of tap into the existing resources that we've got available. There is obviously a number of people who fall out of the system and fall onto benefits and on particularly hard times. I think our role as a responsible employer is to try and avoid that and help through the education of our managers and people to stop that from happening, and to help identify early on when we see these slippages and to put them into the pastoral and clinical care that they need. Because for every move away from the organisation, it gets more difficult to pull them back. So what we want to do is to support them and to keep them at work. As I said before, good work and good quality work is good for the mental health and good for the organisation. It's a win-win.
Yeah.
And in the atomised world of work that we have now, there aren't that many employers of your scale and size where these things are even practicable. So I'm glad we've got at least some grip on it today. Dr. Shaun Davis,
thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Sputnik. And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri?
So we see Jeremy Corbyn supporting the workers at the McDonald strike and supporting Dave Ward's union's industrial actions. When was the last time a Labour leader did something of the kind? Phil Borger says, You mean previous Labour leaders? Because JC has supported workers in struggle and trade unions all his life. JC for Prime Minister. And Stephen Robertson says, JC is talking nuggets. He would need a map to be redirected to what used to be the heartland of Labour in the northeast of England and Scotland.
Well, let me tell you that I joined the Labour... I shouldn't tell you this as my wife because you think I'm 45. I joined the Labour Party in 1967. And I don't know of any Labour leader from 1967 to 2017 who supported an industrial strike. There you go. And as for the rest, some of Corbyn's biggest crowds and the biggest swings to Labour were in the north and in the Labour heartlands. All these anti-Corbyn MPs, he doubled their majorities in most cases.
Disgraceful. I mean, amazing. Well, that's all the time we've got for the tweets today.
Which, alas, means that's the end of the show.
But you can stay in touch with us on social media, on Facebook, Sputnik on Russia Today, or on Twitter and Instagram, RT_Sputnik. Goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.